Hi, here we are at the Social Enterprise Alliance Summit. Can you say who you are?
I'm Suzanne Smith, and I am a chief storyteller at Social Impact Architects.
Okay. So you just gave a talk on the art of cause storytelling, which I love.
Absolutely.
So let's, so give me a story about storytelling. What were some of the things you were touching on in your talk?
Well, first of all, we did a demonstration, and we had one individual actually tell a story and talk about what they were doing and what they were excited about, and then we had another individual read a paragraph off the United Way's website. And in doing so, it really illustrated that the thing that came to life, the thing that jumped into people's mind, was the story and not the written text. Increasingly see nonprofits, with the advent of the importance of data and outcomes, bury themselves so much in that we've forgotten the stories that are inherent in the work that we do. And so really the presentation was about bringing those stories back out and finding that balance between stories and also providing the hard data that makes us efficient and effective as organizations.
So, social cause organizations, nonprofits seem to have a hard time with telling their stories. So why do you think that is?
Well, I oftentimes joke and say that there's an inverse correlation between people who do good and their ability to tell a story.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons is that we become, we kind of drink our own Kool-Aid in some ways, that we think what we do is such a great idea. Why wouldn't people want to help the homeless? Why wouldn't people want to be a mentor? And we forget that the daily life gets in people's way. And that we really do have to try to convince people and use persuasion and influence, the things that all advertising and marketing executives know, in order to get people to believe in those same things the way we do. So it's really about nonprofit folks stepping back from their role and really rethinking what it is to motivate that individual to not only care about what it is they care about, but is what's going to get them to take action. So whether they're going to be a volunteer, they're going to be a donor, or maybe they might even go even farther and give them money and even get involved in the organization.
You were giving us a couple of stats about how telling stories actually is more impactful than not doing it.
Absolutely, and politicians have been doing it forever. Abraham Lincoln, Ronald Reagan, now Barack Obama has been using stories very effectively. But now there's hard science behind storytelling and why it's so important. Scientists have done a number of studies on the brain, and they see that compared to just a bunch of sentences that are put together, so text versus a story, make a huge difference. The story actually has us connect different sectors in our brain. It actually brings up emotions. It actually gives you recall of other things that you connect it with. And as a result, you actually remember things when they're in a storytelling format 2 to 7 times more than if you just get the text alone. In addition, 65% of the conversations that we have as human beings actually are stories. So that's really how we like to communicate. It's really the universal currency among all of us as human beings, despite what language we speak.
We also get hit with about 3,000 messages a day, right? So that's a way to sort of break through that clutter?
It is. So we get 3,000 messages. I think actually in the nonprofit sector it's even harder because we have all the different messages that we're not only competing with from the for-profit area where they have lots of money in order to tell their story, but we have an advantage though. We have the advantage of that our stories are very emotional. They're very meaningful. So we have that advantage. Another disadvantage that we have, as I oftentimes call, we have issue ADD. So is the issue of the day HIV/AIDS, or is it childhood obesity? And so it's really important for us to keep our message current and connected with whatever the hot topic is of the day. So storytelling is a way to keep people connected to our mission and to break through those 3,000 messages and cut to the core and the emotion of why someone should care about your issue.
Can you give us an example or two of a nonprofit or a social enterprise that you think is doing a good job with telling stories?
So there's one campaign that I use a lot in my presentation that I think is really interesting, and it's a hunger charity that is actually, a mom and pop shop, so they didn't have any specialists that were giving them advice. But they recognized that one of the things, and this is just by observing the kids that they were serving, that one of the things that was different between those who they were serving and they weren't serving was the fact that they smiled. And you can imagine and appreciate the fact that if you're a child who's hungry, it's hard to smile because your base level of needs aren't being met. So they actually had a slogan that says, "We produce 1,000 smiles a day." And I think that's a really compelling thought. And the other thing I really like about it is it's unexpected, which is really important because people want more information. So you want people hungering for more, no pun intended. You want people to hunger for more information. In addition, it gets people to really think about and consciously think about, oh yeah, it must be really hard when you're hungry. You wouldn't be smiling, and that's something every kid should be doing. So it connects people on an emotional level. So that's probably one of my favorite examples because it is so simple, and it was actually created by a mom and pop charity. It wasn't by some PR agency or some ad agency. They just did it, and they recognized the difference between kids who they served and kids they didn't serve, and what the main difference was between those children and what hunger can do to a child.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about identity? I guess what the private sector calls branding, and how does that connect to storytelling?
So we talked a little bit about this. I oftentimes, and a lot of the new marketing way of talking about brand is really identity. And what you really want to be doing is identity marketing. And so when I say the word Volvo, what do you think of? You think about safety. And everybody in the room thought about that. When you think of Subway, what do you think of? You think of fresh. And sometimes they do a really great job of talking about that in their ad campaign, but sometimes it's just the implied theme. And so what you want to do is you want to create an implied theme or an identity around your organization and make sure it's consistent throughout. So the real goal when you're talking about storytelling is really creating that reinforced identity. And as an organization, you want to create that for yourself. And whether it's on your letterhead, it's in commercials, it's how the people who you actually hire, you want to create that identity for your organization and be that level of consistency. And that's very important not only for for-profit organizations, but nonprofits as well. A good example of that that I think we probably can all connect to is, some of the Red campaign. They created that identity around HIV/AIDS, and they had celebrities around that. Everybody knew what the Red campaign was doing. I think also breast cancer organizations have done a great job around the pink ribbon and really creating this identity of this woman who really wants to be, in charge and powerful related to her life and taking control of her own health. And so it really creates that identity that's very, very important, and it connects back to the organization.
I think a lot of nonprofits have forgotten what storytelling really means. So it's not even just putting up a blog post or tweeting something out. Tell us about why visuals, photographs or video is more powerful than just text.
So I think you need to do a little bit of both, but I think what we have is we have a culture of lots of reports. We have a lot of data, and sometimes we're buried in that data. And so what it's really about doing is figuring out what the major headline is. What is the big idea that you're trying to convey to the audience? Because the reality is, with these 3,000 messages that we're getting, you want in a short amount of time to be able to tell somebody, here's what I do, here's what I actually communicate. And whether it's a visual that actually is a picture, or you want the person to create the visual in their mind for themselves, that's very compelling. For example, Henry Ford, when he was actually coming up with a car, no one knew what a car was, so he called it a horseless carriage. And in that case, everybody understood what that meant. Another example that I gave is that the city of Quebec was trying to convince people to come to Quebec and actually visit Quebec. And so they actually came up with a slogan, it's like Paris without the attitude. So not only do you have the text, but you have the text that illustrates a visual for yourself. You have a connection to the fact that people in Paris have an attitude, and it makes you think of Quebec. So it's unexpected, it's also kind of funny and interesting. I think nonprofits can do a great job of that too. They can actually, the 1,000 Smiles is a great example of that. The Race for the Cure is a great example of that, of where you can really connect with people through very few words, but through visuals of strong women, of smiling children, and you can talk about not only what you're accomplishing through text, but you can also talk about the individuals themselves and why they're transformed over time.
And for a small nonprofit or medium nonprofit that doesn't have many resources, what kind of tactics would you recommend for them to actually do this? Do they want to enlist their supporters, volunteers to go out and take photos of their events, that kind of stuff? Or
That's a great question. So there's two things. One, I would be a collector. So I would collect stories as much as possible, because you never know when you're going to need to talk to a policymaker or you're going to need to talk to a funder about a specific story in a specific neighborhood. So make sure that you empower all of your staff, not just the executive director, to be a collector of your stories, of your memories. Take pictures of people when they come, children that come when they come into your program and what they look like, and when they leave your program. Chart out those stories. Keep up with some of the individuals who've been through their program so you can really talk about those stories, because that's very powerful. The other thing I would do is I would really change the culture of the organization. So it's about collecting and it's about culture. You want your culture not to just be what I call a culture of social soldiers, people who come in, do the work, and it's hard work, but you want people to be social evangelists, people who are always out there talking about why what they do is so important, and they have consistent stories that they talk about why kids end up using drugs, and what the story behind the story is, and the root cause of that drug use, or why it's so important to make sure that the disabled or people with autism have, through social enterprises, have jobs, and why that's so important for society. And so really connecting with people at every different possible time, whether it's friends, families, and elevators, but really being evangelists around that cause so we really can connect people around the cause. So I would say it's cultural, making sure that the organization and every person in the organization gets the cause and they explain it to the people around them, but then also I would say collecting the stories. Also, if you do those two things, I think and it's very low budget to do those things, I think you can make a huge difference in how your organization tells its story.
Yeah, once you collect the stories, there are probably some people inside the organization that know how to put it together in a compelling way, whether it's a video or a photo collage or something like that, right?
Exactly.
I mean, the tools have become pretty easy to use.
And I also think, too, being consistent. So I would talk to each different, staff member and say, what story do you tell? How do you tell the story of our organization? And kind of put it all together in one piece, come up with the different elements. It's kind of like a puzzle, and that you take different elements from different staff members, and then everybody says the same story. And maybe with some slight variations based on how they came to the organization or their own personal situation. But making sure that there is some consistent story out there about why the organization exists. Maybe it's a catchphrase of some sort. Maybe it's some kind of pithy thing. One of the slogans I always love is, with the Peace Corps, it's the toughest job you'll ever love, or with the AmeriCorps, it's the domestic Peace Corps. So to really explain what it is that you do, so that people really understand it, I think is also very important. So coming up with something catchy, I think is also really helpful.
And then how do you get the message out or the story out? You were talking about cross-pollination a little bit.
I think cross-pollination is very important. So once you're consistent and making sure you stay consistent, cross-pollination is very important. I think sometimes we forget that different people get their information in different ways. So the traditional forms of media, like newspapers and TV, still are very, very helpful, and you want to get the message out that way. But there's also the immediate ways of non-traditional media. So web, tweeting, Facebook, all of those different things are also very helpful, and making sure that whatever way you're getting it out there, that the message is still very consistent. It's just in each different format, you may distill it in a certain way for that particular audience or for that particular medium. But making sure you get it out there as far and wide as possible so that somebody always sees it, and if they see it more than once, then they just remember the story that much more.
Okay, and last question. So you work a lot with different clients on storytelling. So what kind of stuff do you do for them?
So I will say the first thing I did was I worked in the social sector, and I got better about the storytelling. And I was the first to believe that it was really about the facts, and the facts were really most important. But as a former lobbyist, I recognize that in talking with people, no matter how research-oriented they are, or they love the story, they connect with the story. And so I became more and more convinced that the story was really something we should lead with. And in fact, politicians have a quote saying, "You campaign in the poetry and you govern in the prose." And so I would say nonprofits need to do that as well. So to get people to support you, you want to campaign with them in the poetry, but then you want to talk to them in the prose. So once you get them, give them all the information and all the facts so they can support you. So I really just help organizations do that. Cut through the clutter, cut through all the large words that we use in the nonprofit sector, and really get down to the heart and the meat and the big idea around what it is we accomplish, and tell it in a compelling way. And to be honest, I think that once that's done, it can be utilized many, many different times. So it's a very cost-effective way for nonprofits to get their message out.
All right, great. All right, it's a great story you're telling, Suzanne, so thanks for what you're doing.
No problem. Well, I appreciate being asked to do this, and if you guys have any follow-up questions, I'd be happy to talk with you.
Okay, thanks very much.